So today I want to talk to you about love languages. And this one's going to be really interesting. First, before I say anything, I'm actually calling you from a very, very, very small town in Mexico, which is called Huasca de Ocampo. And it was the first, I don't know how much of it you can see, the first Pueblo Mágico of Mexico. That's the little church there. And that's the town center right behind me, which is the first magical village of Mexico. It's really old, very small population. But what I want to talk to you about today, and I wanted to reach out to you as I always do on my travels, to talk to you about love languages. So I was recently on one of my Discord chats with one of my students. We were talking about something, and he said that when my brother died and my girlfriend came up to me, this is how, I wanted her to respond to me, and how I wanted her to connect with me, and how I actually showed my love language, which could be anything. Like, what are your love languages? It could be acts of service, it could be quality time, it could be affection, physical connection, it could be any of those things. But the reason why we express our love languages in a certain way, or we desire love in a certain way, or we give love in a certain way, is because that's primarily what our conditioning has influenced us to express as. So our love languages really, really actually come from our conditioning, and they're influenced drastically around our conditioning. You may be curious and being like, how does that even make sense? How is that even possible? And I'll tell you how. So, when we were children, our parents had their own conditioning and their own wounds in whatever space they were in, right? And so when we wanted connection, we had to be able to approach them in a way that they would accept the love or give the love. Because as the children in that space, we weren't in control of the situation. Our parents were really more in control because they had a prefrontal cortex, they were more emotionally mature, etc. So we realized that to connect with them, we had to really adapt in a certain way to their kind of love, their expression. For example, for me, my dad was someone who wasn't very emotional, and so for him, his love language was more around an act of some sort of service. And so he was a very good provider, very, very good provider, and he would actually show up for me. Sorry, I'm just gonna eliminate a bit of the noise in the town here. So he would actually show up for me in terms of like providing for certain things, school, if I needed anything. It was always provided for what I needed, not necessarily what I wanted. And so it made me realize that to connect with my dad, I had to return the same. And so I had to look at what are the things that he found valuable for me to show up for. So he may not have needed certain things, but especially around work was where I got a lot of approval from my dad. So if I performed really well, I used to be a professional soccer player. So he loved sports. And for me, a way to connect with him was when I really played my best game, or to invite him to my games. Would he really give me? So what's really interesting is, because I had such a strong lack of true physical connection from my dad and from my mom, that is something that I subconsciously would desire more of. And that's what I would want from partners and from everybody else. But so after a game, I would have loved for my dad to come hug me and be like, good game, son. I'm so proud of you, whether I played badly or not. But instead, the way we'd connect is we'd sit down together and we'd analyze the game and we'd talk about it. And I realized that was the best way for me to get connection with my dad, was to be able to sit down rationally and analyze and evaluate, how have I done, like what was the game like, and he felt really connected in doing it. So that's why, especially in certain environments in the North American space, or most other environments where it's conditioned for males not to have a very strong emotional expression, they connect over sports, they connect over like politics, they connect over different things, because the language of connection at that moment becomes around like not just interests, but it comes around feeling involved, spending time discussing those things, performing a service in a certain way, going with a parent to church, showing up for a particular parent in a certain way, like providing them with certain something. That's what gets you that validation and approval. So that's just one way. There are so many other ways where our parents really connect with us and provided us any sort of connection based on what they were okay with, right? Now, two things happens when you're a child. Either that becomes your idea now of how you need to accept and give love, or that becomes the opposite of what you want because you didn't have that. And so you try to overcompensate in the other direction. I became an extremely touchy-feely person. With all my friends, I was always physically overcompensating because I almost never got real physical love from my parents. From my siblings, maybe, But from my parents, I didn't. And so I'd always try and like hug people and kiss them, overbearing in some way, because that became my love language. So as I grew up, I started to think to myself, oh, I started to believe this is how I express love. I just have to do it in this way. There's no other method to get it from. What that does for us is it severely limits us when we're getting love, when we're with a partner who may not, for example, be able to provide us love in a more physical context, who may not be able to provide us affection in a way that we want. And so we subconsciously disregard that connection, whereas that connection may have actually been really valuable. So what's the roadblock there? The roadblock is our conditioning. The roadblock is our wounding. The roadblock is our story saying that this is the only acceptable way of love in our lives. But is that actually fucking true? Oh, sorry, there's a church right here. Is that true? No. That's just how our conditioning limits the way we can get and receive love. So here's a bigger question then. What happens if I am able to go back to my past stories and my past wounds when I try to reach out for love from my parents, especially, for example, physically with me, and I was invalidated, so it made me feel like I had to overcompensate? What if I start healing that wound by reparenting myself? What if I start to give myself a level of physical love, like touch myself before I go to bed? I start to embrace myself more. I start to sit with myself and imagine my inner child sitting on my lap and I'm rubbing his back or his belly or his curly hair. I start to feel a little more satiated when it comes to my need of love, which is the physical affection way. And so what happens now in turn is that when I have a partnership, I have less of a demand from that partnership to meet my physical needs of love and connection. And so now in this space, I am now more open to what are the ways of love my partner can provide, even if it's not necessarily something that I've been wanting or I give. And so because I'm satiated in my own wounding a little more, I'm actually removing the layers of my conditioning. I'm becoming so much more open to a new way of love, which means I'm so much more open to new versions of connection, new types of partners, and a new expansiveness of love. Can you think about what that means? Think about for a second, I want to go back to the conditioning aspect, right? You think about even cultural conditioning. There are certain countries in the world, so I was born and raised in India, you go to the Middle East, and if you're seen holding someone's hand, that's an immediate no-no. If you're seen, kissing a partner, you can't even imagine. It's not even something that's acceptable between a man and a woman there. So those families grow up with physical love and affection not being a sign of like their love language. So it comes more an act of service there, because men are meant to like serve their partners in a certain way. Women are meant to serve their partners in a certain way. And so what happens now is our idea of love language has also been influenced by society. PDA in certain countries, as I was talking about, is very limited. In certain countries, as I talked about, if the males or even the females are conditioned to behave a certain way or to act or feel a certain way around their emotions especially, then how they express their emotions to their partners also changes drastically. So if we think about, again, North America, Canada, if we're thinking about those spaces where men have been shamed for emotions, just to say, then their idea of love starts to come more for, I have to be the provider and that's what makes me feel valid. And so now when their kids or their wives are trying to connect with them, they feel a huge disconnect because they just aren't fully capable to meet that. But what if they were able to recondition themselves by healing those past wounds, healing the past conditioning, and to provide a new level of conditioning for themselves on how they can love? Now, they meet their wives and their kids where their wives and kids want to be met. Think about how motherfucking beautiful that is. That we now, by healing our wounds, healing our past stories, and healing our conditioning, by reparenting our own selves and providing our own needs of like how we want to be met, and also healing the ways we want met. This is what's really important. Healing the ways we want met. This allows us now to be able to meet people more for where they are. It allows us to be able to participate in relationships more vulnerably, more openly, to be more broad in our expansion and our display of love. Someone who only connects in a physical way of love, for example, may now connect in a very much like in a time way, may actually dedicate time in that way whilst also having a physical connection, but not only depending on one or the other. They may be able to understand their partner's way of giving love so much more. Like if someone was buying me gifts all the time, I'm like, dude, just spend time with me. I'd much rather, you spend time with me so I feel valid. But now I'm open and expansive to that because I'm spending time with my own inner child. And so I don't feel a lack in that particular space. So it's so infinite how much our love could grow. Our love for the people we love, who or we connect with, who are our partners, our love for our parents. Being able to see what they have done as a result of their own conditioning and wounding, but being able to see what they have done not as a limitation, but as their capability. Being able to see them for what they can provide as something that's where we can meet them, where we can recognize them, where we can accept them. It becomes so much more magical because our ego is not now dominant in love. Our ego is not deciding who it is who's going to be in love. It's our inner child. It's our healed, loving, and connected selves. And if there's anything, that now opens up our experience to such powerful and infinite connection. Something I've been thinking about more and more myself, because I've been witnessing different partners show up in my life with different capabilities, and I've noticed that subconsciously it's been making me react differently, but I'm reacting based on my conditioning, not on what they're providing. They're just reflections for it. And so I noticed that if I'm limiting myself in certain ways, I'm limiting myself to a certain connection because of my story, not because of what they're showing up as. If I'm more open after healing my story, perhaps it inspires them to open up a little more, and we both meet in a way we both desire it mutually. And so it starts to become like an interconnected understanding, not a codependent understanding, not a resentment building understanding. It starts to become an understanding that's so powerful between two people. So what I want to leave you with today is to understand how much more infinite could your love language and expression be, how much more massive could your ability to connect, to give, and to receive love be if you were able to heal more of your wounds and change more of your conditioning. There you go. So you guys have a beautiful time. I'm about to go see some beautiful sights here in Huasco de Campo and meet some amazing people. Just had a nice margarita sitting in the town square. And I hope this video really added a lot of value to you, your connection, the relationships you have now, and the relationships that you can attain. See you guys soon.